Syntech, and welcome to another episode of Meet the Grower. Today, we have a very, I'd say well-known guest, Dr. MJ Coco of Coco for Cannabis, and the associated YouTube channel, and books, and all sorts of cool stuff. Dr. MJ, thanks for joining us today, brother.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Matt. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, and we met through an interesting arrangement there, and it looks like we're going to be doing a little bit of work going forward. So I'm really excited for that, and I'm also excited to have you on the show today to chat about all sorts of cool stuff. Although before we get into that, quick shout out to Mars Hydro, main sponsor of the channel, ILGM. They also like to do some stuff for us, and guys, if you like what I'm doing, Patreon links down below. Dr. MJ. You got quite the interesting stuff going on between the website, the YouTube, and I'm sure there's probably a couple of things that I don't know about. But I think first and foremost, before we
maybe a couple, yeah,
get into all these questions and whatnot, maybe just give me a little bit of your background, a little bit of your history. I mean, the doctor thing isn't just a moniker that you've adopted for your brand. You actually have a PhD.
I do have a PhD, yes, and I'm a university professor, although on a bit of a hiatus this year. I haven't taught any classes this year. I have a background in horticulture. My PhD is actually in agricultural anthropology, specialty in peasant economics. So my sort of deep academic study is adjacent to horticulture. It's not actually in horticulture itself, but I did a lot of graduate training in horticultural classes and other things like that. I taught classes on small scale food production, on crop genetic science. And so I have that sort of academic background in agriculture, sort of in general. When then came to cannabis, I mean, I was a recreational cannabis user,
right?
In high school and college and my 20s. Actually stopped using cannabis in grad school. And I have a type of arthritis and called ankylosing spondylitis. It's one of the conditions actually that the cannabis has been studied for, and has sort of positive effects. It's one of the arthritis that is treated really effectively by THC for some people, by THC specifically, not by CBD. A lot of other people use CBD or use cannabis compounds for other purposes, for inflammation relief, but the sort of functional pathway is different. And anyways, I was taking other much more expensive medicine at the time in grad school, and the insurance stopped paying for it. And my rheumatologist actually had read a recent study on cannabis being used to treat ankylosing spondylitis, and he recommended that I consider it. I'm still one of the very only people that I know that has got their medical marijuana card from a referral from a sort of primary care doctor, instead of like themselves going and requesting it from he had referred me to a cannabis specialist that wrote the script. But so at that point I wasn't able to grow for a while, and then once I finally started to be able to grow cannabis, sort of space and living arrangement situations at the time, I got pretty heavily involved in this. And now I can't remember what question you originally asked me. I'm not sure if I'm even answering it, but
you are, just
it seemed related to those topics.
Your background and stuff, kind of how you get to this point.
So I've been teaching university classes. I've been growing my own cannabis. I did a lot of research on growing soilless and growing in coco coir. And, when I turned to sort of the community of cannabis, because a lot of my work as an anthropologist is in small scale farming communities in Latin America, where farmers have a real strong sense of community, and they share labor with each other. They share knowledge, they share genetics, they share all sorts of stuff with each other. And one of the things that I found growing my own cannabis was it was really isolating. It was just like me growing in a closet in my condo. And I didn't have that sense of sort of community. So when I turned to the cannabis community, I realized that not everybody sort of came at providing information from sort of a scientifically rigorous background and approach. I started writing little guides for how to do different things, and then wrote the book that sort of grew up into the book Coco for Cannabis. And then I started the website Coco for Cannabis, and the rest is history.
Yeah. So then I guess the YouTube channel where, you do a great honor to the community, providing these magnificent lighting reviews, super in depth, really the sort of information that we need to get out there. How did that come to be?
The Grow Light Guide project, that was another area. So, Coco for Cannabis started really, my background in horticulture and in soilless horticulture, particularly having studied that for a few years. And then the person I partnered with, who calls himself Dr. Photon, was really, his background was in light.
Yeah.
And in indoor lighting. And we had sort of long conversations about the physics of light and about the metrics used, and sort of getting into the common misconceptions. And, I think everybody's aware that grow light companies have not always been very honest with how they market and sort of the statistics that they put out about the lights. And it created one of the biggest areas of confusion for home growers, was understanding lights. The transition from HID to LED just like scrambled everybody's knowledge, where there was a good sort of working folk knowledge about how to operate HID lights, HPS lights. Every single LED is different, and the manufacturers were putting out these fantastical stories about their efficacy and their power and all the rest of that.
Yep.
And generally we would be able to calculate estimate at least the amount of light that the different lights would be able to produce. And almost every grower that was sort of opting into that LED market, as recently as a few years ago, was dramatically underlighting their space, because they were buying into these stories about it being a 2000 watt LED or something, being 1,000 watt HPS replacement and all that crap. So there was a huge need for third party independent sort of testing and reporting about what these different fixtures actually did, how high you should actually run them, how much space they could actually cover, what the sort of par distribution would actually be. So yeah, it grew pretty quickly. In terms of, we started publishing articles, writing articles and publishing articles about light and about using light effectively. And then I got sort of my head wrapped around the Grow Light Calculator project. It was a couple of years ago now, and spent a couple months sort of working every day, developing the Grow Light Calculator and sort of figuring out how to do those kinds of calculations. And having done that, in order to do that, we had to rely on test data. And I partnered with Shane Torpy from iGrow, who provided very graciously like all of his test data that he had done through a couple of years of testing lots of different fixtures.
Yep.
So we were able to use that. But in order to get really good comparable data, and sifting and sorting all this data and trying to understand the relationships between different metrics like sphere test data and par test data, for example, it really became clear that we needed to simplify, to refine the testing protocol, and to be able to get tests that were really comparable. So Shane and I had several long conversations, and we sort of collaboratively worked through a lot of these issues and agreed to a new kind of testing protocol that we would both adopt going forward, and sort of try to establish more of a standard way of testing lights. And yeah, so at that point, still, even after developing the testing protocol, and even after sort of testing lights, I didn't know how I was going to do videos, or even if I was going to do videos.
Yeah.
I have the grow light guide and Coco for Cannabis, we have all the test reports are all sort of built out, and the listing in the grow light calculator and all the rest of that. I was primarily initially starting to just get more data for that and to be able to continue to refine those formulas and publish the data someplace, because Shane wasn't even doing that at MyGrow. Like, in order to get Shane's data, you had to mine his YouTube channel and like his individual videos. It wasn't published. So we wanted to pull it all together and publish it and create sort of a static resource that people could go back and compare different lights and see how different things stacked up. And yeah, once I did my first video, the first video was pretty popular. I figured out a way to sort of do it because I didn't want to appear in the video, which is sort of harder than it seems, I think, on a lot of these
I can
things.
Appreciate that. No, for sure, for sure.
Yeah. So you got to figure out what does appear on the screen when you got stuff you need to say when it's just like a light. So yeah, I had to get like trolleys and things to like be able to move the camera around and show the light in motion and stuff so I could talk while that's happening. But it's been a lot of fun. I've really dove into like video editing now, and I like doing the like transitions and animations and graphics and stuff like that. So I have a lot of fun sort of playing with that side of it. And the YouTube channel has become really sort of a popular thing. And it becomes an important source of sort of revenue for the rest of the website and supporting other things like that. Referral traffic that we get from those grow light videos.
Well, and this is a tough space to play into because a lot of people don't necessarily look at cannabis as being helpful, beneficial, and we'll get into that here in a little bit because I got a couple questions along those lines. But I wanted to touch off, just working with Shane over at MyGrow, and more so the phone par meter app. I'll be honest, I don't believe in them. I don't think they're very good. My history in electronics, I've done a lot of light measurements and that sort of thing myself. So I've got a history of working with CCDs, and just, I don't know, I wanted to get your take on, do you think that they're reliable? Do you think that they're useful?
No.
Yeah.
No. I've tested them. So I'm not just saying that based on sort of impressions. I wanted it to work. Growers always ask me, like, what can I get to test my lights? And, the answer is, unfortunately, a really expensive quantum sensor, because we're not measuring light in an easy environment to measure light in. We're measuring light inside a grow tent, inside a reflective space where light's going to be coming in from all different angles. And the light itself is a distributed light source. So it's not like a single point that's originating someplace. It's like all over the place. So that it just creates angles coming. I mean, the photons coming at different angles with that, which isn't going to convert well. Whenever you're doing a lux to par conversion, you have to make a bunch of assumptions. And one of them is that the spectral output of the light source that you're using, because different photons will have different brightnesses. Red photons aren't as bright as blue photons, for example.
A lot more energy.
Yeah. So, but if you're just measuring brightness, you're not going to be able to convert that to the number of photons unless you know the ratio of all these different photons. So you have to first know that. But the other really complicating factor for this is the angle of attack of the photons hitting the sensor. That those photons that come in at a lower angle aren't going to appear as bright as photons that come directly down from the top. But if they hit plant chloroplast, they're going to do just as much photosynthesis, right? So you have to start from sort of the understanding that measuring light in a grow tent and accurately measuring it is really sort of difficult, even for good quantum sensors. They have to do cosine adjustments for sort of the angle of attack and to figure out the right, value for the PPFD.
Yeah.
But if you want to get an accurate measure, so what I did with the phone sensor app, and I tried different settings. I had the paid version, so I could flip through all the different sort of options for different lighting systems and stuff. And I used it with and without the paper diffuser. right under the middle. And I sort of knew it would be off and I'd have to do a calculation. So right in the middle, I'd compare it against the Apogee SQ500 quantum sensor and, be able to see, okay, it's off by such and such a factor. It's like 1.6 times the other sensor. And I thought, okay, well, if that holds, then, and if that's consistent across different models and stuff, we can just tell people, okay, you just have to do a multiplication, right?
Conversion factor, yeah.
Right. But when you moved both sensors over to a corner, now it was like 3 times lower than the quantum sensor instead of being 1.6 times higher than the quantum sensor.
Yeah, so
it's not just that they weren't sort of in sync, they were off by radically different numbers in different places under the canopy based on sort of where the light was hitting it from and stuff like that. So
yeah.
I mean, I wanted to be able to give people ideas like, okay, if you have this is sort of like, ballpark what you would be able to get out of it. And I couldn't. I mean, I was like, I can't get any kind of useful information back from this. So it was about a year ago that I did those tests, and but you understand the basic underlying problems with the sort of science, what they're trying to do.
Well, you're using a CCD as opposed to a proper photodiode. You don't have that proper sphere for diffusion. Just even getting into the basics. The one thing that I've talked to folks about.
Yeah, those are issues. I mean, even deeper into the just using. Yeah. I mean, I'm sort of talking about all the issues that would apply to using any kind of lux meter.
Oh, yeah.
The phone sensor in particular is just not even going to be a very good lux meter, but it would be better as a lux meter than it would be as a quantum sensor in any sense.
No, you're absolutely correct in that regard. And that's the one thing that I've talked to folks about is just, if you really want to try and do the basics, just look at what the par is and then use the integrate or the inverse square law and calculate it out. You're going to get a rough.
Hold on. You can't use the inverse square law in a grow tent. You just can't.
Oh, in a grow tent,
because there's so much reflective light coming back off the walls. Like the inverse square law assumes that light will just keep spreading out as it travels through space infinitely. Right. But it doesn't, and that's one of the things that makes this sort of complicated. What you need to use is a par map, that's why we started doing this kind of testing, right? So you need to get a par test like the par test that I set up that is in the size space that you're growing in, and be able to see, well, okay, what's the hanging height that's really the minimum hanging height. And that's the most important thing you need to know. And you need to know not to get sort of closer than that. If you have enough light, like being at the minimum hanging height is not very important. And it's usually not very efficient. It's usually more efficient if you have enough light to be several inches higher than the minimum hanging height. In tents, sometimes you run right out of room. So you need to be aware of sort of what that minimum hanging height is. Mm-hmm. But that's it. You need to be able to know how to calculate that you have enough light, but for your space. But you don't do that with the quantum sensor anyways, like, holding it above your plants. You have to do that. You can do it with the par test. I mean, that's one of the things that I measure is the usable photon flux, like how much total light is going to hit the canopy from this fixture. And that determines how much area that fixture can cover. Once you're sure you have enough light, you need to just be sure that you're not getting that fixture too close to the canopy. And a reliable par test from the same size area makes a huge difference. I did some tests a while ago with a little spider farmer fixture, SF2000, in a 2x3 area. And I tested it with the walls at 2x3 and get great sort of, values in that space. I moved the walls out to 3x3, but just measured the same 2x3 space that I had measured in the first place. And the light went down in that space by almost 30%.
Interesting. Very interesting. Now, is that just around the outside edges or was that in the center as well?
Well, it just like the 2-foot edge got moved out to 6 inches on each side, but I didn't record the light that fell into that. So that light, so if you just don't even have your walls right up against the plants, if your walls are just 6 inches away from your plants, you're giving that light room to like escape uselessly into the space, right? It's not gonna end up hitting plant and provoking photosynthesis.
Yeah.
But if when you take the walls all the way away, you lose over 40% of the light from hitting that same sort of space. So that's, yeah, it's important to understand that a lot of the light, so in that 2x3 space, over 40% of the light from that original test that I had the walls in place, over 40% of the light that I measured there was reflected light that had already bounced at least once off the walls before coming back, because that light wasn't present when I took the walls away.
I gotcha. I gotcha. See, and that's what I like about the idea of the inverse square law is that it's giving you that minimum in an unideal situation where you don't have that bounce. You've got that direct single point pointing
Right.
down, and it's better than using a phone meter in my opinion. But I think we probably dug enough in on lights. I
Yeah,
wanted to
it just
chat on
starts with
growing and
you
stuff
got to
too,
start with a
man.
reliable
Oh yeah,
data point, and I
that's
think
the
that
biggest.
trying to get your own reliable data point with the phone meters, it's not going to be ever very reliable. A more reliable data point would be from a trusted PAR test.
I think so.
Even for
100%.
myself, I don't try to use my own quantum sensors in my grow tent. It's too complicated. You got to do it with the doors closed and with you not inside, which means you got to figure out some way to like hold the sensor in place while you then zip up the tent and take the reading. It's just not a practical thing to
Oh
do
yeah,
when you're
totally,
tent
totally.
growing. So get a good PAR map, but you don't need to get a quantum sensor.
Yeah.
That's really the ultimate answer
It's
there.
yeah, it's overkill. Just go to the Coco for Cannabis website, or at least as a start, look at the spec sheet and try and get informed. But noting that the spec sheet that they're giving you is likely going to be the best light that they measured in their space when they did their run of however many thousand that they did.
Yeah.
So that's the take.
Yeah, I will say that they're getting better
They
across the
have to be.
board.
They have
Some
to
of the
be.
no-name brands still make fantastical claims, but like, yeah,
Yeah.
at least the brands that I've been working with, if they're making fantastical claims, I'll call them out on it in my videos. I'll be like, so they're saying it's this, but it's not anywhere near what I'm publishing
Yeah.
or what I tested, and they've kind of fallen in line. They're not saying outrageous things anymore. So I have. I don't know. I'm heartened by sort of the response from some of the
Totally.
grow light companies in publishing more accurate information now.
Yeah, keeping them accurate. And there's enough competition out there now too that they have to be honest, because if they pull something shady, folks are going to find out about it and call them on it. So definitely appreciate what
Yep.
you're doing in that space. So shifting
Awesome.
gears,
Yep.
start growing. Now, Coco, has it always been Coco, or did you start soil? Tell me a little bit
It's
about
always
your
been
growing.
cocoa for me for indoor growing cannabis. But no, I've grown lots of different ways. I mean, outdoors, I would not consider growing in cocoa like this. It's really a style that I've developed and sort of committed to because I think it's the best way to grow indoors. Um, in indoor growing, we have different sets of consideration. I mean, we're paying, for the sun in the indoors.
Oh
We're
yeah,
we're running the lights to power this grow. So everything becomes sort of more valuable, and you're more interested in that return on investment. When you're a farmer outdoors, you do not consider the return on the light investment in the
no,
same sense that you
no,
do when you're going indoors. And you have more time, time becomes more valuable because you're paying for it in the indoor growing sense. So a lot of growers, I think, are caught up with some of the wrong questions about environmental impact and sustainability. Because our number one concern, I think, when we're choosing to grow indoors is the energy that we're choosing to invest. And most of that energy is going to the lights that we're running. I mean, if we're running climate control equipment too, but all of that is then going to be sort of quantified against the return. So how long it takes all of that equipment to run, all the power that you need to put into that's where your big environmental impact is coming from, pretty much regardless of all of the other decisions that you make. I mean, if you're being really reckless with some of your other management decisions, your environmental impact might be greater in other areas. But for the most part, all of us indoor growers, our biggest environmental impact is the power that we consume to run our
absolutely.
grow equipment.
Yep, couldn't disagree with that at all.
Yeah, and in that sense, I think that Coco offers a lot of advantages in terms of speed and manageability, and some of the properties of Coco that allow it to be suited really well for automation, and allow sort of an easier management practice. The main one being that Coco can be kept at or near field capacity,
Yep.
which means like with as much water as it can hold. There's no real risk of overwatering in a well set up cocoa grow. And so that allows you to keep everything dialed in. The air to water ratio in the root zone is ideal at 100% saturation for the plants, especially under high frequency fertigation, where they're getting most of their dissolved oxygen directly from the water. And you can get really rapid growth, explosive growth, as good of any sort of other hydroponic method. It's easy to reset. It doesn't depend on a continual power supply. So like a DWC system, if the power goes out and your air pumps stop working, I've always sort of thought about DWC growers as like growing plants on life support machines. And,
Yeah, that's a good one, man. No, for sure.
yeah,
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
It's totally true. That air pump that's keeping that water oxygenated is your life support machine. And when the power goes out in a DWC grow, like you're immediately have to panic and do something to prevent your roots from starving from oxygen. Coco doesn't have sort of those kinds of management concerns. It can be run with very little waste. I'm on a crusade now to try to get people to be more sort of frugal, because I think one of the downsides of there being little risk to overwatering is a lot of growers end up overwatering, and that can become pretty wasteful.
Yeah.
But it can be run with very little waste. It can be run with much less water than most other hydroponic systems, because you don't have to do like a flush of the system or cycling out of used nutrient solution or other things like that. Yeah, sorry, I'll stop. But there's a lot of advantages to growing in cocoa in an indoor growing sense. So I'm able to turn crops really quite quickly, get really sort of dial in what we're going to get and know what your harvest is going to be going in, and be able to get that every time. And for new growers, it's a method of growing that we can teach new growers pretty quickly, and they'll have success. They're not going to lose crops or lose plants or deal with those kinds of issues. It's fairly formulaic. You can follow the sort of instructions. You don't need to have a lot of pre-existing knowledge. So I think a lot of new growers come to this because they find it's easy to have success. It's something that they can manage pretty quickly. And you don't need to be sort of a wizard to figure out when to water again.
Yeah, it's very step by step, very formulaic. It's that do this, you're going to see this. If this happens, do this. You get that immediate result, immediate feedback. Unlike organic switch, you screw something up, it may not be noticeable for a couple of weeks.
Right.
But
right.
Talking then about the marriage of sort of cocoa and organics, there's a certain YouTuber who most people know, goes by the name Mr. Canucks Grow, very much a proponent of the cocoa and the dry amendments. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that you're not taking advantage of sort of the true miraculous property of cocoa in that sense. It's fine. Cocoa it can be used in other ways. I have no problem with that. It's a wonderful garden amendment. It's far more sustainable than peat. So that's the other thing. If you're growing in a peat-based media and you can substitute some of that peat with cocoa, it's definitely going to sort of improve your sustainability metric in terms of the way that you're growing. But for me, like cocoa is a miracle horticultural media because it can be capped at field capacity, which really requires runoff. I mean, you're holding it. The best way and a professor in college used this example while we were in the field in a farm, and he had a bucket of water, and he had a big sponge, and he dropped the sponge into the bucket of water, and it soaked up all this water, and then he held it up above the water, and the sponge is like dripping wet, right? Like water's pouring out of the sponge for a while. And he's like, Right now, this is above field capacity, right? Because water, it can't hold the amount of water that it's got in it. It's like releasing it to gravity. As soon as it stops dripping, it's at field capacity, right? It's fully saturated, but it can hold all of the water that it's got. Well, in order to get to field capacity, you got to like go a little bit past it, right? Get those drips, get sort of, and then let it kind of back up to that point.
Yeah.
And that whole style of sort of keeping the cocoa saturated doesn't lend itself to dry amendments, where you want to water below the point of runoff, and sort of keep the stuff that you amended in the pot, right?
Yeah, that is the tricky part, is finding that medium of saturation, but not having too much and runoff,
Yeah.
because then it's your stuff's just running out the bottom. So interesting take.
And I think that's so once you develop your own sort of knowledge, this is a way of growing in cocoa that I would argue requires more knowledge, requires more sort of wizardry.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of growers that try it in the first time struggle with different aspects of it. It's a lot harder to control nutrition in that sense. In any amended grow, it's harder to control nutrition than when you're fertigating, when you're providing the nutrients with the water, and you can always just provide more or less with the next watering. Than when you have to bake it in or top dress it in. It's always going to be sort of more difficult. And the other issue is you're not going to be able to escape the cation exchange with calcium. So one of the sort of the Achilles heel of growing in cocoa is the cation exchange issue, and how hungry it is basically for double charged cations like calcium and magnesium.
Yep.
And that's true whether you're fertigating or whether you're amending, using dry amendments and not fertigating to the point of saturation. As the cocoa breaks down, it needs more. It will take it from wherever it can get it, the calcium and magnesium, and it will take it preferentially to the plant getting it, and it will provoke calcium and magnesium deficiencies in the plant. So it can be hard to sort of adequately provide enough calcium and magnesium without interfering with other aspects of nutrient uptake and nutrient solubility.
Yeah, affecting that balance.
Yeah, that's the balance. And when we're fertigating, when we're mixing all of this into the water, we're following a recipe sort of for each time that we mix water, and we're starting with soluble nutrients every time that we start mixing water. And so we have a better control of making sure that those things are delivered in ratios that are both going to satisfy the cocoa and satisfy the plant. And I think that that's where a lot of growers that try a dry amendment style with cocoa get into problems.
Yeah, I did it myself. I experimented, and it wasn't until I added some compost into the cocoa itself that I started seeing better results. And I think it was just more of that overall holding capacity too, like you're talking about. It's a different experience. But then just to kind of touch off something else
there's other issues there though. Like the whole thing, cocoa is just so interesting to me because like the amount of root space it provides and root health means that you can grow it in really small containers usually. Which lends itself brilliantly to a high frequency fertigation strategy that I follow. And in order to do a dry amendment strategy, you have to grow in a larger container. You need more sort of container size to hold everything that you're trying to provide to the plant that way. And that means that the cocoa isn't going to perform as well because it's going to have in a larger container, the center area is going to have sort of less exposure to surface area. It's going to have poorer drainage. And a lot of those sort of functionally cool ways that system works under high frequency fertigation in small containers, you'd have to come at those problems. You need more perlite, for example, to help with drainage through the center of the media. You'd have to be really careful with your transplant strategy to make sure that you have good root mass throughout the sort of media volume, things like that.
So always perlite? Do you play around with pumice, volcanic rock, or aerosols, any other available aerations out there? Or it's perlite is the one you found that works the best?
People do, and they have success with them. I haven't played around with hummus or rice hulls at this point. Yeah, perlite is another sort of mined resource. So, and coming at it from a sustainability perspective, there's a finite amount of perlite, and it is something that we're mining for horticultural purposes. I try to conserve it, and I reuse my cocoa and my perlite through successive grows. So, like, I'm still basically caught in that same system, right? Where I reuse the last grows cocoa, add a bit more cocoa, a bit more perlite or whatever. But yeah, it's the same basic blend for years now. I keep reusing the cocoa until, like, eventually the oldest cocoa is gone because I rinse it every time that I go through. So a little bit rinses away each time, but you can reuse it. That's another important sort of dimension of grow sustainability.
Oh, for sure, for sure. And it's important to stay sustainable in everything we do. I've actually started doing a 50-50 mix of cocoa and peat, and I find it's really, really nice because as you were talking, the cation exchange, the CalAg efficiencies that you can see, it's, yeah.
The peat helps. I know growers that start in peat and then put the, pot up into cocoa, like start in a little like party cup size container of peat.
Yeah. I've gone back and forth because they're both excellent products. But I mean, like you say, you talked about peat and sustainability there. And here in Canada, we've got the Sphagnum Canadian Peat Moss Association, which only allows for 1% mining per year. But it's still really a non-renewable resource. So over time, I think even with that guide to sustainability, we're still going to run out.
I mean, yeah, those kind of sustainability metrics just depend on how long you set the horizon, like how long do you want to keep having these things? And yeah, I'm not saying that I use a little bit of peat in my grow. I use peat starter plugs to transplant my sprouts into, basically, but just Jiffy pellets, I mean, it's like a shot glass full of peat per plant per grow.
They work good.
And peat is a more buffered media, so there's not any cation exchange like the CalMag issues that we deal with in cocoa. So it can be an easier media for seedlings. It doesn't have as good of drainage properties, and it doesn't also, ironically, have as good of water retention properties as cocoa. But it is certainly easier to grow little sprouts in than cocoa.
For sure, for sure. And of course, it gets really hydrophobic if it gets too dry, which can be a pain. So, talking now about underestimation, what do you feel that most experienced growers tend to estimate? Pardon me, tend to underestimate, if I can say that properly.
So, experienced growers tend to underestimate about their own operations or about other people's operations?
I'd say their own operations. Where are we getting it wrong?
When do we tend to, I'm trying to think about what I might be underestimating. I underestimate the amount of time it's going to take me to do certain things.
Yeah, I hear that, man. I hear that.
Or I overestimate the amount of time that I'll have available to do them. How do I underestimate? Or what do other experienced growers underestimate? How much knowledge that they've accumulated, probably. And I think that comes to play often when talking to new growers that don't have access to sort of that years of knowledge. And when you can talk in ways or in jargon or other things that people might not understand, but I don't know if that's really what you're going at.
Well, no, I think that's definitely a fair answer because you do this enough. You absorb stuff through experience, knowledge, talking to other growers, and I think that's the best thing nowadays, especially, is the fact that we're able to chat with each other, have this larger community, work together as a group to help bring people up, new growers and whatnot. So to that point, what do you think we can do more of to help the new grower out?
I try to do everything that we can think about. I've really given thought to that particular question. I mean, and so we have resources like the chat room and Coco for Cannabis, which is just a live 24/7 chat room that people, and we get a lot of sort of brand new growers that don't want to start a forum thread or something like that, but we'll just pop in and sort of ask a quick question. You know, cultivate a sense of community, as the two of us have been talking about, along as we're cultivating our plants, that we really tried to help each other out and to create that sense of welcoming, because, you know, I think a lot of people inside the cannabis community can forget what it's like to be sort of or outside of that, and sort of, you know, just being somebody that likes cannabis and, you know, knows how to get it or something, and now is thinking about growing it themselves, and they may have friends that are growers, and, you know, they may or may not be even talking to their friends about their interest in doing this kind of thing, and it's like they're trying to figure out where to have all of that. So, you know, a lot of people can be, I don't know, this may have been changing too. I spend less and less time sort of in other forums now, but my experience early on in using other forums, that they were often hostile places. And new growers would be made fun of or sort of mocked for their harvest, or they'd show a picture of a plant. It was really heartbreaking, you know, to see that, to see somebody post pictures of like something that they were proud of, and like, you know, their first grow and they've gotten something to harvest and they're like really excited about this, and they make some sort of comment or post in some forum about that, and somebody just like piles on and is just like, oh, that's shit, you know, you need to learn how to grow, and this is like, it just is like, no, that's not what we need to do, right? We need to encourage people, and that person may never have come back and like updated that journal again or whatever, or not decided that they wanted to share their experience with other people. So I think that one of the things I've really tried to do is share the sort of spirit of collaboration and grower love. It's like, let's spread that. You know, this is a beautiful plant that we all love the plant and we love the experience of growing it. Let's try to be welcoming, and let's try to cultivate that sense of community and collaboration, and create resources and opportunities for people to get together and share those experiences. So yeah, we do grow challenges at Coco for Cannabis, but we don't do them as grow competitions. And we always do, our prizes are for like best grow me and best journal. Best recovery does get a prize, but that's like the only prize you can get for like having any grow skill. And it has to be that you screwed something up in the first place and came back from it, right? And that's really because we want people to share their mistakes. We want people to like, because the other side of being a new grower is you go to like Instagram and everybody's posting the pictures of their prettiest flowers and their best looking plants and their grows when everything goes right. And they don't see sometimes the struggle that goes into it and the mistakes, and you can feel like I'm the only one that's screwing things up. And then you go and make a post and ask a question, everybody's like, hey, you're an idiot, whatever. I mean, so let's try to build the grower love, the spirit of collaboration.
Hashtag grower love. Like, just perfect, man. And, you know, it's just there's so many things I can touch off there. The spirit of community is such a big one. I'm currently working with in-house genetics and doing this worldwide grower showcase called One World, One Plant, and that's the whole thing. It's the spirit of collaboration. It's celebrating the home grower. It's not a competition. It's we're all in this together. We're all growing this one plant. We're doing it for ourselves and for each other to help bring this community up. And I think just doing more of that across the board is really what we need to do, because this is such a great community and everybody's showing love. You know, that's what it really comes down to. I love that, grower love.
Yeah, you know, I think I've thought about this in my academic work as well, but humans can be competitive or we can be collaborative.
Yeah.
We're very good at doing either one, but we usually can only do sort of one or the other. We're either competing or we're collaborating. Yeah. And if we're put into a competitive framework, we'll compete and we'll try to win. If we're put into a collaborative framework, we'll try to help everybody out and we'll all try to like succeed together as a team. So yeah, you know, turn on that collaborative side, and we can do this. And one of my examples of this is thinking about like an obstacle course, right? If you're like off in the woods facing some obstacle course, so like 5 other guys, right? And I can tell you at the starting line, okay, this is a competition. Your goal is to win. All right, you're going to be ruthless. You're going to be trying to like, you know, take whatever advantage you can as your way through that. Yeah. But if I told you at the starting line, your goal is to work as a team and get through together as a team, you'd work together as a team, you'd help each other out, right? And get through you'd have fun both ways,
Yeah.
right? Like if you enjoyed that activity, you'd have fun doing it either way. You just have to be sort of put in the right framework at the outset and sort of take that framework. So we can all choose to sort of take that framework ourselves.
Excellent advice. What do you feel your biggest struggle as a grower is?
Um, I feel like I struggle with time management.
So much so.
But it's
So
not
much
really
so.
like the growing time. It's like the time to do the things that I want to do in my grow. I keep like
Yeah.
overbooking myself in the rest of my life and then not having adequate time for my grow. So, yeah, time management is going to be my issue. I've got other aspects of my grow pretty well dialed in. I'm trying to set up some new systems and stuff like that. So they're not all dialed in right now, but that's all voluntary, and it's all sort of relates back to time management.
Yeah. Yay for automation. I'll just say that much.
Yeah, no, well, that's it. Like one of my issues is trying to put together a new automatic watering system, which should be easier in the end, but the setup part of it in the beginning, it's one of these deals where it's easier to hand water today than it is to set up the automatic watering system today. But you know, over a stretch of days, it would have been really nice if I had invested the time at some point to have done that.
Yeah.
But
been there.
yeah, it's got to happen. I still look around at my schedule. I'm like, I'm not entirely sure when. And silly, I got all the way to this point. They're in flower now. They're in 12/12. So now I'm like dramatically limited in terms of the time that I have to be able to do the work. So these are the challenges that I face as a grower.
Oh, I hear you. And it echoes the same issues that I have. And talking about equipment, though, what do you feel is the most important piece of gear that you have in the grow space?
Well, there's different ways to come at this. So like, I think the most important gear that anybody has in their space is their grow light.
Of course.
Right. But I think that's sort of like the generic sort of answer. In my particular grow, like something specific about how I'm gonna my saucers, my self-draining saucers that I made these things years ago.
Oh,
I have a little tutorial up on my website about how to make self-draining saucers, and they just sit 3.5 inches tall, and they gravity drain the water away from the saucer at the after each irrigation event. So it would be hard for me, and it is hard for me when I don't have them or I have to grow sort of without them. I have to figure out some other sort of system for managing that. Managing runoff is an important sort of side of growing with high frequency fertigation. So I'll go with that, my self-draining saucers.
Hey, that's a great answer, man. That's a great answer. What about a piece of gear that's let you down? Have you ever had anything take out a grow?
The aforementioned self-draining saucers immediately back to mind.
The highs and the lows.
Yeah, wait a second. Well, before I figured out the right glue attachment for one of the lines, the self-draining saucers had a rocky start to their experience.
Self-flooding. Oh man.
I've had lots of issues with operator error. Equipment, I've had like fans break down on me and things like that. Everything else, I think my issues that I've had with equipment is because the grower forgot to like flip a switch or reset a sensor or something along that. So grower error has occurred, but I haven't had like a grow light catch on fire or the fertigation pump go out. I did have a fun experience discovering the siphon effect in my automatic watering system.
It's funny, I had that happen last night to me. So
yeah, well, for the first time I was about to leave town, and this is going to be the first time I left town after having set up my automatic watering system. So I was going to have to, fill the tank up for the first time, sort of all the way up to the top. And it was just fine there all the way up to the top. And then we're about to leave, car's packed. And I'm like, I want to stay and watch it do one watering event before we leave, make sure everything's like in line, right? For this automatic watering. So we live in a 2nd-story condo that like there's neighbors underneath us and shit. Like it would be bad to leave town with like a flood. So the event goes, I see the halos come, the water distributes, I'm watching it. And I'm watching it in the tent, and it's still going. And I'm like, the event's only supposed to be like 20 seconds long. And I'm like, it's still going. I'm like, okay, 20 seconds is over, but like it's still going in the tent. And then I realized that there had been a siphon, right, created by the water, and the reservoir level was now higher than the water coming out of the drippers, and the whole line was pressurized. So it was full of water. So it just kept draining, and it was going to drain the reservoir down to whatever height the drippers were at, right? Until it like leveled out with gravity, which was going to be like 6 gallons or something that was going to flood the tent like immediately, like then. And I couldn't stop it. I mean, thank God I was still there, but like I couldn't stop it. Like I couldn't get the siphon broken with, So I'm like panicking now. It's like the water's like going through. It's like a couple minutes. This event's supposed to be like 20 seconds. I'm now bailing water out of my reservoir, right? To like lower the water level, because I figured out what's happening. I'm like, I got to bail. I got to like get this back out. So that was fun. But again, not really equipment breakdown, but much more sort of operator error. People, incidentally, I've sort of shared the issues with the siphon effect in my automatic watering system article, and people often tell me that you should break the siphon, but the siphon actually does serve a purpose. It pulls the water out of the lines after the event, after the pump stops. So it keeps water from sitting in the lines, which prevents, bacteria growth and other things like that.
And the pink ooey stuff that builds up and nasty.
All right, I'm doing much longer-winded answers to these questions than I think you're anticipating. I'll try to be more succinct.
That's awesome, man. I'm sure the viewers are absolutely loving this. But we are getting to the end here as we get near the bottom of my list of questions. I do have a couple more. This one I think is really poignant in that a lot of people have different answers to this approach, and that's when somebody is starting growing, they're looking at getting that very first row going. What do you think the most important thing is that they should focus
on? So they don't have anything in mind other than I'd like to grow cannabis.
Yeah, where do you start?
Well, at a certain early point, you should establish goals for, harvest size, and also how much space you want to commit to this from your living area or wherever else you're going to be setting this up, and what your budget is. And then sort of try to reconcile those things. Like, is your harvest goals in line with the amount of space that you have? And do you have an adequate budget in order to get the equipment that you would need to sort of properly outfit that space? So I think it starts there. But, at a certain point, you got to figure out how much cannabis do you want to grow.
Yeah. What's your return? That's a great way to look at it.
And then from there, we can calculate, how much space you're going to need in order to grow that cannabis. I got an article on this thinking about what's your harvest goals and what size tent you would need. That's sort of the first article in a series that takes growers through this. The second question then is getting sort of the right light and enough light. Most of your budget is going to go for your light, for most growers at least. So to sort of think through that harvest space, light for that space, check budget. Are you sort of still in a reasonable area, and go forward from there.
Perfect way to start. And guys, again, the website there, just a plethora of fantastic grow information. So Dr. MJ, I absolutely blown away, wealth of knowledge, fantastic guest, really enjoyed having you on the show today. Aside from the website, the YouTube channel, any other places we can find you? I'll list them all down below in the description there for folks.
I'm on Instagram. I have the Dr. MJ Coco on Instagram, the Dr. MJ Coco YouTube channel. and Coco for Cannabis. Come by the chat room. Our next Grow Challenge is the Spring Autoflower Challenge. It starts on April 20th. So 420, and we'll drop seeds for the Autoflower Challenge, which is this year's theme is the spring picnic. And I think we got like the fruit group and the beverage group and the snacks group. And so you choose, the group based on at least one of the strains that you're growing. You try to like fit in like this is a snack or this is a fruit. A lot of people are in the fruit group, to be honest with you. I think we got a dessert group, stuff like, and then there's always a misfit group. It's just a fun competition, not competition, sorry, a fun challenge to grow together, a collaboration. And I'll be growing in that, and you can start your own journals for other things in our forum as well, or do other things like that. But that's definitely the best place to try to track me down.
Right on, right on. Well, guys, look for him there. And again, Dr. MJ, just enjoyed having you on today. And there's that one question that I do like to ask everybody as the final one, and that's what do you feel the next big thing is for cannabis?
Ooh, there's a lot of sort of wheels in motion, and for cannabis. Oh, wow. I don't even know which sort of way to go with this, like regulatory way, like sort of in genetics, in sort of the next sort of breeding, coming out of thinking about the autoflower challenge. I do think that autoflowers have a prominent role in the future of cannabis. I don't think they're the next big thing, but I expect them to start playing an increasing role in the commercial space. So we'll see about some of that. Some of the other things I think are further down the line in terms of being the next big thing. But I guess increasing acceptance of cannabis, increasing legalization. I'm increasingly encouraged by new growers popping up in new places that I wasn't even aware that they were able to grow there. Yeah. And they're like, oh yeah, we just got this legal here now or whatever. So the next big thing hopefully is freeing the shackles of prohibition, continuing to.
Yeah, and bringing the science and education that comes along with it. And I think ultimately that's the best part is we're really starting to learn about what the benefits truly are of this magnificent plant.
Yeah, cheers to that. Yeah, the medical research side, all of the cultivation research questions that we've had for so long that people haven't been able to or haven't bothered to properly sort of investigate. Yeah, it's an exciting new sort of era for that kind of research too. I agree. I'm always interested to see what comes down the line with that.
For sure. Great things to come. Well, guys, there you have it. Dr. MJ Coco. Check out his site, his YouTube channel, his Insta. I mean, he's all over the place doing great things for the community. Dr. MJ, thank you so much for stopping by today.
Absolutely. Grower love, Matt. It was a pleasure being on your show.
For sure. Grower love.